away we go. So this is really, like everything else, pretty much all my other presentations, born from trial and error on my part, and learning from people who know more than I do, and reading and trying things. And vehicle operations in particular are kind of sensitive because, we have a lot of rules and regulations regarding what you're doing while you're driving. And I'm going to address that a little bit. So, we obviously, as amateurs, we have to be concerned about the effectiveness of our station, but we also have to be concerned about our safety. And in this case, that includes the safety of those around us. So we're going to try and talk about that. The first question when you're evaluating how you're going to put your station together in your vehicle is, how are you likely to be operating? If you're going to be operating routinely, that means you always need the station available. That really suggests a permanent installation, not something you take back and forth from the desk in your den to the car and plug things and unplug things all the time. I understand for security reasons you may need to do that, but generally we're talking about a relatively permanent installation. If you're going to do special events like contests and races and so on, likely you will be having some temporary element to your installation, because you may be parked in a particular spot for an extended period of time, a checkpoint or something like that, in which case you have some more flexibility on what you're doing. We're talking about operating while stationary. If you're operating while you're driving, that brings up other conditions. And if you're moving at all along the highway, especially if you're like, I've done some of the race communications for Baker to Vegas relay, which is 100 miles across the desert in California and Nevada. I've been one of the drivers / comm guys for one of the race officials. And that means we're going at reduced speeds on highways. And so that meant I had to have the blinking yellow light and so on. You need to have the vests on if you're going to be near the highway and all that sort of thing. This presentation is going to talk mainly about VHF and UHF, because that's what most of our Aries folks and our newer hams doing. And frankly, it's most of what I do. HF Mobile is a whole different animal. And I'll give you a reference at the end that I think will be your best source of information on mobile HF operation. This is my Forerunner when it's got a modest single band, more or less, station at 10 gigahertz up at 8,000 feet on Fraser Peak. It's a 2-foot dish with a feed, and then I've got transverters in the box. That's a rotator there, so I can sit inside and operate everything remotely. So that kind of works out real well. This is a friend of mine, W6TE, set up for 10-band operation. Most people aren't going to go to these lengths, but you can, and you can do it safely if you plan it. So first thing I want to talk about is driving safety. Not everybody has the same level of multitasking ability. Some people can walk and chew gum quite well at the same time. Others have trouble with it. So the first thing you really need to do is evaluate for yourself. When I'm driving, am I easily distracted? If I go to change the channel on the radio or change the screen on my nav system, do I find myself wandering across the road? If you have, based on your own observations and experience, if you're not comfortable that you can continue to drive safely while doing some radio tasks, and it may be just pushing a push to talk button or changing a frequency or something else, then you shouldn't do it. Make sure that you are in a position that if those sorts of things are distracting, like switching channels on a mobile rig, maybe put yourself in a position where you can pull off, set what you need to set, and then continue on your journey. Now, there are also some legal restrictions. Obviously, it's going to vary state by state. In the case of California, where I'm located, we have a vehicle code section, which, like most of our legislation, is not well defined. It leaves a lot of wiggle room, which may be on purpose. We don't know. I made trips up to Sacramento to try and get get some leeway in this particular law that came about a few years ago. Unfortunately, there is no statutory exemption for amateur radio. A few states have it, but ours don't. However, we took this to the California Highway Patrol and asked them what their interpretation would be if they were enforcing this. And they said, basically, if you have a radio with a wired, it's wired in radio with a hand mic and not a hand device, you should be okay. Other jurisdictions and the courts, of course, may disagree, but most of us have a copy of that CHP opinion in our glove compartment, and we keep it. And for those who don't have it and are in California, you can go to the ARRL Southwestern Division site and you'll find a copy that you can download. So here's what it says. A person shall not drive a motor vehicle while holding and operating a handheld wireless telephone or electronic wireless communication device, undefined, unless the wireless telephone or electronic wireless communication device is specifically designed and configured to allow voice operation and hands-free operation, and it is used in that manner while driving. Now that would appear to exclude our radios, but it doesn't. We pointed out that would also exclude all the public service radios that police, fire, public works, trucking companies, everybody else uses. So the Highway Patrol tells us that for the purposes of this section, a radio installed and mounted in a vehicle with a wired hand microphone, which includes business band, CB, and so on, is not considered wireless communication device. Hey, we got wires, right? Nor is it considered a specialized mobile radio device, and therefore is not subject to enforcement. So that's our story, and we're sticking to it. Now, Nevada has a little different rule. Their ban on handheld wireless communication devices excludes ham communication for disasters, emergencies, drills, and exercises. But what about if it's not an emergency or a drill or a disaster and exercise? It says, though, the ban does not apply to two-way radios if all controls other than a mic and push to talk are on a separate unit not held by hand. Now that raises the question, if you have a microphone that has a touchtone pad on it and it's wired to your radio, does that put you in violation of the Nevada law? What if you can you buy one that doesn't have the push buttons on it? I don't know how that's panned out in Nevada, but it'll be interesting to see if we get anybody from there who can give us feedback on that. That would be great. Arizona has a ban on handheld wireless communication devices that excludes amateur radio, among other things, and also commercial two-way radios. This was an interesting one because before that law was passed, Coconino County, which is, Flagstaff and up in that area north of the Grand Canyon, had imposed a ban on all two-way radios while driving. And the truck drivers all said, fine, we're not going to deliver your propane. We're not going to deliver anything. All your stores are going to go empty. Goodbye. And a big convention that involved mobile radios said, fine, we're canceling our convention. County supervisors thought for a while and they changed the rule. Then after that, they actually got a real statewide rule that gives exemption to amateur radio, and that's thanks to the very hard work of Dennis Petrie and all the guys who work with the section manager there to keep legislature informed of what they're doing and so on. So check the rules in your state. You may have to talk to people because the rules may be unclear. There may be case law, there may not. Now let's talk about other safety in general, not the legal side, but the physical side. There are all sorts of potential hazards that can hit you when you're using mobile radios. One is if you don't have it wired properly, you can have electrical shorts or fires. Typically, you're hooked to a car battery. If you have something set up so that you could effectively short the car battery, that's a bad thing. If you have gear that's not well mounted and you get into a crash or a turnover, it could become a projectile and hurt you. You don't want equipment that's going to obstruct your visibility. You don't want stuff bolted up to the top of the dash and you have your dash full of radios. Antennas you don't want causing injury or damage. One of the sites I'm going to refer to later, k0bg.com, talks about the possibility of a mag mount antenna as you're turning a corner coming loose and swinging by its coax out toward the people on the curb and whipping somebody with a piece of steel. And then there's the issue of potentially harmful RF exposure inside and outside the vehicle. And we'll go into more depth near the end on that one. So let's talk about powering your equipment first. One possibility is to carry an outboard battery, or if you're operating fixed portable outside your vehicle, a generator. A good deep cycle battery that's properly mounted can run your equipment sometimes for several days, and I've done that. I've used that for my on my microwave things, where I have several microwave bands plus a rubidium frequency oscillator for my reference, plus the liaison radios, the inverter that runs the rotator, and so on. And 150 amp hours or so of lithium iron phosphate battery will run all that stuff, and I don't have to sit there and idle the car. Yeah, I can run everything by idling the engine, but a day or so of that pretty much uses 2/3 of a tank of gas, and that's very inefficient. If you're going to be operating portable and using a generator, of course, keep the exhaust well away from people, well away, and preferably downwind from everybody else. Cigarette lighter outlets, so-called utility outlets, they're convenient, but they're typically designed for less than a 10 amp load. And if you've got a 45 watt mobile radio, you may well approach that load or exceed it when you're using your radio. So that's not really a good source. If you're going to use the house battery, or your starting, lighting, and ignition battery, make sure you use very flexible cable. Remember, mobile vehicles, when they're in motion, have a lot of vibration. Even though you may have a decent ride, it's still going to have a lot of vibration, which means cables wiggling back and forth. You want the most flexible cables you can. I use welding wire, number 6 welding wire, which has got like 250 some strands. It's like rope, and it will never work harden because it's so fine and easy to bend. Make sure when you're running cables, you include a cable for the negative side of your power. Do not rely on vehicle chassis or body ground for for your radio ground. For one thing, a lot of vehicles don't have metal going all the way from point A to point B anymore. And for another, if there were ever to be a failure in the connection from the battery to ground, you could end up with a lot of current flowing through your radio and fry it. So make sure you have, equally capable positive and negative cables. And of course, again, keep them short. Remember, there's loss in cables. We'll talk about that.
Hey, Marty, there's a question.
Yes, go ahead.
From Tom in Maryland. Can you comment on the effect of the location of the display on the operator's ability to drive safely?
Good question. Generally, you want to keep it below the dash, but where you don't have to look far down. Mine is about the level just below the air vents, so it's about and it's above the transmission shift. So that way I can glance down briefly, but I don't have to look down or hunt around for it, and my eyes aren't very far from the road. So to me, that's the best. There may be somebody who's developed some heads up kinds of displays where it shows in your windshield. That'd be cool, but I don't have that. So I would say keep it just reasonably below the top of the dash. That's probably the best in terms of, minimizing your visual distraction.
Okay, I think that answers it. And someone also said to keep airbags in mind.
What about the airbags?
When you're putting equipment in your car, keep airbags in mind.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you don't want it between an airbag and you. And in my vehicle, I ordered it with all the side curtain airbags and corner airbags and everything else. So this is where there is no airbag. That's another excellent point. Thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions.
All
I
right,
have.
good. So
Okay,
let's.
what do you do when there are two batteries, like in a truck?
When there are two battery, okay, that means uh, assume. Well, I don't know how they're wired, but if the truck has two batteries, one backing up the other, and they're charged, they're hooked in parallel, then you can hook to either one. If one of them is intended to be for accessories and the other for starting and lighting, then I would probably use the accessory battery, assuming it gets, it's gets recharged from the generator. Some like some utility vehicles, and in some cases RVs, they'll have a device that basically splits the charge and isolates the two batteries, and one will be called a house battery that runs everything but the car, and the other is the starting, lighting, ignition, or SLI battery that runs those three things. So we talked about wire, and I said, bigger is better. There are two reasons for that. One is, of course, heating, which is a safety issue. If you've ever dropped a number 24 clip lead across a fully charged battery, you know what can happen. That current results in goes through that thin wire, which is a lot of resistance. That basically dissipates power as heat. The thing smokes and melts. I have smoked and melted wire in the past, and became more careful as a result. The other is a performance issue, and that's voltage drop. If you have the body of the radio in the back of your trunk, and then you just run a control head up to where you are, and you're running it off the car battery in the front, you may have 16, 18 feet of cable. And if you're using, number 14 cable, you're going to have a lot of voltage drop there. The more current you draw, the lower the voltage is going to go, and it may get to the point where it's not enough for the radio to perform up to its standards. And of course, I mentioned strand count is great. The kind of stranded wire you find in TW house wire doesn't really cut it. It's, maybe 7 strands of wire. You want hundreds of strands. You want as flexible as you can get it. And as I say, welding wire is a great source of that. So let's look at a quick wire size example. Let's say you have 10 feet of 14 gauge wire. So that's a 20 foot round trip, out the positive lead, back the negative lead. So that's about 2.5 ohms per 1,000 feet when you look it up in the wire tables. So that's 0.05 ohms on transmits. That gives you about 0.5 volt of drop. Okay. Now, instead of number 14, let's say you're using number 6. Okay. You still have 20 feet of round trip, but it's only, it's less than 0.5 ohm per 1,000 feet, which gives you 8 thousandths of an ohm, which means you've got 800ths of a volt when you're drawing 10 amps. A big difference between less than 1/10 of a volt and 0.5 volt. So there's the operational reason to use bigger wire. And remember, you're only talking about, 10, 20 feet of wire. So I understand if you're going to talk hundreds of feet that, the big stuff can get expensive, but you're only 10 or 20 feet. Make the investment, use good stuff, and then you'll be, you won't have to worry about it. It's, buy once, cry once, as they say. When you're going to route cables from under the hood, you have to be careful to stay away from all hot engine parts, stay away from sharp edges. One of the ways things I use is this plastic split loom. It's easy to get, and you can just push your cables into it, and then use tie wraps to keep them around, the firewall and away from the radiator and the hoses and anything that may get hot or near a fan or anything like that. And then I run mine behind the wheel well, so it's not getting splattered with mud and water and so on, and grime. And then from there, it goes up through 2 grommets under the passenger seat and terminates in a 75 amp power pole. And that allows me from there to use a splitter. And I have 4 power pole outlets there with plenty of current if I need it. Recommend that you use good crimp terminals on any of the wires that need such a terminal, whether it's a ring connector or whatever. do not solder them. And the reason is that soldered connections will harden the wire at the solder point and soak, it'll suck back into the wire away from the connector a little bit. And when you have stiff wire like that, there's an opportunity for it to work harden. You remember we talked about vibration in a vehicle. You don't want that to be a source of vibration. We talked to the folks from Anderson, as in Anderson Power Poles, and although their site says you can solder them, they recommend, the guy that we talked to recommended for mobile operation, you don't. He said a good solid crimp is almost like a cold weld. So don't worry about losing, increasing resistance or losing, conduction there. You're just fine with a good crimp connector, and you won't have that work hardening problem. You're going to have to provide some system fusing. Now, this is not the fuses that are in your radios, and it's not even it's not really anything to do with radio preservation. If something happens that shorts the cables between your battery and your radio, you have basically shorted your battery. And that is a bad thing. Batteries are capable of delivering huge amounts of current in short periods of time. And if it's not going to run a starter or lights or something else, it's going to be dissipated as heat. And very fast heat is called an explosion. So you want to fuse at the battery end. Okay. That is the place that reduces the length that is subject to damage without being fused. You may, depending on your vehicle, need to fuse both plus and minus. I don't worry about that. I have one big class T fuse, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then, of course, you have fuses for individual equipment. You may have that built into like a rig runner panel, or you may have it inside the radio itself. Very seldom do we end up blowing fuses inside radios anymore. That's a good thing. So down here on the lower right is a typical automotive fuse, and these are not to scale. This is shown bigger than it would be, and this is shown smaller than it would be. Up on the left is a class T fuse, and this is the holder you see for it. I've got one of these mounted inside on a bracket that I made inside under the hood, very close to the battery of my 4Runner. Class T fuse has, like every other fuse, it has a blow rating, and that is when you exceed the rating for a certain number of seconds, eventually it will open. If you exceed the rating by a lot, it will take fewer seconds to open. But it has a second feature. Now, go back to your automotive fuse for a minute. What do you typically see if an automotive fuse is blown? You hold it up to the light, what do you see? You see a little gap, right? Maybe 1/8 of an inch where the wire melted. Well, after I retired, one of the things I did was take some classes in welding, and I started, of course, with the arc welding or stick welding. And what are you doing when you're welding? You're creating an arc by, you scrape the metal with a rod and hold it, 1/8 or 1/4 inch away, and you have low voltage, high current. Well, what do you have when you short something in your battery system? You have low voltage, high current. So conceivably, you could have an arc there that would just keep going, which means the heat would continue to build up and do damage. The class T fuse has 2 ratings, not just one. It has the normal blow rating, and then it has what's called the amp interrupt capacity. And what that is how many amps are going to try and flow that we can stop. And they stop it because it has arc squelching powder in it. These fuses are rated for, specific, let's say the one I use is 125 amp hour. That's its normal blow rating, because I know I'm never going to exceed that except when something really goes wrong. But its second rating, its amp interrupt capacity, is like 250,000 amps. Okay, far more than the battery can deliver, even instantaneously. So that means it will squelch that arc before it gets a chance to start. Class T fuses come in a variety of sizes and even some really huge ones, two-handers. And interestingly, the spacings are all different and the holders are all different. And that's so that somebody doesn't mistakenly put a 100 amp fuse where a 700 amp fuse should go. It kind of forces you to use the right size. So it's well designed, and you'll find these in the solar industry, in the boating industry. And there are a lot of, well-known makers of this stuff. So, Little Fuse, but also, Blue Sea and several of the others. So if you're going to have wires coming from your battery into the vehicle, this is not a bad thing to do. Assuming you're running off the starting battery, you have to make sure that you don't deplete the starting battery by sitting parked for a long period of time and running radios. You've got an 8-hour shift at the marathon or whatever it is, and you're going to have maybe lights for a while. You're going to have radios, but you don't want to leave the thing idling because there are runners going by and you don't want them to smell the fumes, whatever it may be. So you have a couple of choices, several choices. You can manually turn off the radios when you're not running the engine, or you can wire it to the ignition switch so that when you turn the ignition off, the radio goes off. Or you can have an automatic low voltage cutoff device where if the battery voltage gets below a preset level, it will shut off your load. Or you can get really good at using jumper cables. I've done that too. One mountaintop, fortunately, there were other people around and we jumped the thing and I got back to normal. But the low voltage cutoff devices, here's an example. There are several makers of them, commercial device, and the connect voltage and the disconnect voltage are settable. So you can say, sometimes they come at a standard of say 10.5, which is kind of the fully depleted level for a lead acid battery. But you may want to set it to 12.25 or something like that, so that you're getting to the point where the voltage isn't enough to run the radio anyway. So these are good investments if you're going to be doing a lot of running of the radios from the starting battery without having the engine going, and you want to be able to start when you're done. Let's talk about your antenna choices. For VHF and up, you have the venerable quarter wave whip that's vertically polarized. You can have whips with more gain, and you may have one or more bands on them. You may have, if you're working VHF or UHF sideband, a lot of the folks you're going to work have horizontal polarization, and there are these horizontal loop antennas. Several makers have them, and they would mount on a mast, much like a mobile coil, loading coil would, but they are a horizontal loop, and they will send omnidirectional horizontal radiation. Or you could use a small Yagi or quad. If you're with stationary use, like you're at a checkpoint or something in a race or an aid station, and that who you're going to be talking to is net control, who is 8 or 12 miles that way. Little 2 or 3 element Yagi or something will give you the best signal to that direction. We use them in the mile out situations for Baker to Vegas, where we're a mile out from the checkpoint, and the folks have maybe they'll use 220, one of the less used bands, to advise when runners are getting close. And a little Yagi can help that really well. Or if you're going to need to talk to a distant station for coordination. Even when you're mobile, you can actually mount a small Yagi and have it work pretty well. I mean, you saw the picture of my friend's red truck there, and you'll see mine at the end. We have Yagis, loop Yagis, as well as dishes. For stationary operation, make sure you pull well off the road and well clear of any traffic, particularly if there are trucks on the road. They have quite a bit of wake turbulence, and you don't want that hitting you every time one of them zooms by. And they're not going to slow down just because you're parked on the side of the road. Before raising antennas, make sure you look around for any power lines that might hit things. Don't route your cables through open car doors. You can say, well, I'll just leave the door open. Yeah, but the wind may have a different idea. Make sure that you avoid any cables or wires that may trip somebody if you're around an area with participants or observers or aid workers or anything like that. So use flagging tape if you need to. Make sure you have your antenna up at a point where some ground radial isn't going to poke somebody in the eye. You shouldn't have it that close to people's heads anyway, just from an RF safety perspective. So if you're going to have something that's not mounted, in the middle of your roof or something like that, get it up high enough so that it's out of everybody's way, physically and electrically. If you need to, bring some barrier tape or ropes, or rope off the area so that crowds aren't in there and getting too close to the antenna or kicking your power cable out or tripping on the coax. And of course, before you pack, when you're packing up, make sure you account for everything and have it well stowed. You don't want to leave with a cable dragging out the side of the vehicle. We talked about routing cables through car doors. When we do our vehicle roving, one of the tricks that I learned from Wayne N6NB, who's done a huge amount of that over the years, is we run it out one of the unused windows. Typically, that's the back passenger window, and use the foam tubing, the split foam tubing that is available at hardware stores to insulate water pipes. So you get a small one that goes over the edge of the window, cut it to size. Then you get a big one that's designed for larger pipe, open it up and put it along the jamb of the top layer of the door frame, and put your cables through, run it up, and you can squish it down pretty well. You can push the cables in and out. You can tell, yeah, okay, that's loose enough. It's not going to damage the window and it's not going to damage the cable. So that's, and it gives you enough of a seal. You don't get a lot of wind noise. You don't get water in there if it's raining. Really neat trick. How are you going to mount your antennas? Good tripods. There are all sorts of, you have speaker stands. You have, we have a bunch of our folks in ACS are in the movie industry. They have these things called C stands or Century stands, Manfrotto and some of the others. And they put those stands out and they can go up 20 some feet if necessary. The industry, of course, uses it for lighting and mics and things like that. We use it for antennas. You could use a drive-on base. This is simply a plate and a tube, and that are welded on, and you drive with your tire onto the base, and that tube isn't going anywhere. Then you slip your mast in there. You could use a mount that slides into a 2-inch hitch receiver or other size hitch receiver. I have those receivers front and back on my 4Runner, and it's really convenient. I can put the antenna up high in the front, and then I can still open the back hatch without worrying about interfering with an antenna. You can use a magnetic mount on the vehicle roof or on the hood. You can use trees or existing structures, especially if you're going to be portable HF, or you have an antenna that could be strung up from a tree. I've done all those things. And I personally like the hitch receiver mount because, it's fixed to the vehicle. You don't have to worry about it coming loose, and it gets stuff up and out of the way. Here are various kinds of tripods. There's that C stand on the right, a typical speaker stand in the middle, and the usual, TV antenna mast type tripod on the left. You're going to have to make sure it's weighed down appropriately, sandbags or something like that. And if it's tall enough and it's windy and there's a chance of overturn, make sure you have some tag lines on it so you can guy it sufficiently to keep it from tipping. And at the same time, when you're doing that, make sure again you flag the guys so that people don't run into them. Here's a real nice drive-on base. You can tell when your tire settles into the middle of it. We had an interesting situation up on Fraser Peak once when we had a fellow in a fairly small car stick shift, and none of the area was real level, so we had to drive onto this base, and he kept overshooting it. So I said, okay, drive past it, and then instead of trying to hit your clutch just as you're in the middle, drive past it, and then use your brake to roll back. And as soon, that you have much more control over that. and he was able to stop it right on the dime. So that worked really well. Here's a sample of a hitch receiver mount on my vehicle. This is basically clamps from some scaffolding. And unfortunately, it's not exactly, it's not a great fit for 2 inches. It'll work, but it's really a better fit for 1.75 inches, which happens to be about the same diameter as these fiberglass camo poles that are so commonly used. You know, they're about 4 feet long each, and you can stack several of them up. By the way, if you stack a bunch of them up and have a load on them, you stack them up vertically and put them in one at a time. You don't put them all out and then raise them like Iwo Jima, because they will snap and break. We've had that happen. So I have a 2-inch, what would normally be have a hitch on it, and instead I've got a pipe on it that's also about 1.75 inches. These things swing closed. You tighten them, and that will hold the mast where I need to be. This is for a fixed situation, obviously. In a situation of having to be driving while one of these things is deployed, you would have the bottom right up here. In fact, I have special mast made with a welded ring around here that sits on that second clamp, and it can't slip down. Make friends with your local welders. They can do all sorts of amazing things. This is all aluminum, by the way. Mag mounts are good for small whips, but again, watch for trees. There are low branches all over the place. I've had them bite me very inconveniently and ding things up. The better way is to use a permanent mount that typically is used in NMO, or New Motorola mount. This is what you'll find on most commercial equipment and police vehicles and fire and so on. The nice thing about it is the mount itself, which is connected to the shield of the coax, bites into the steel underneath on the underside of the roof. So you have an electrical connection, which really gives you a real ground plane. I mean, the mag mount doesn't really give you much of a ground plane, but this does. You have the possibility of trunk lid or gutter lip clip-on mounts. Clip-on mounts I'm not a big fan of, mainly because you don't have that good solid connection with the steel of the vehicle. You have some that are designed to fold over, so when you go into a garage, they don't go hitting everything. They're the glass mount, or through the glass mount, where you put one side inside the window and one outside the window. Try to avoid those. Their RF performance is generally very poor. You don't really have any electrical connection, and so where's the return? Well, the return is coming down your coax and back into your radio. And then for HF, you have the ball mounts, where and you've probably seen these, about a 2-inch ball, and it's diagonally arranged so that as you turn it, it changes the angle of the mast. And then HFers will put coils on it. You could put one of those omni horizontal antennas that I mentioned, the Squalo type of things. But if you're going to use a ball mount, remember, the longer the mast, the more lever it is to try and rip it out of your car body. So you may end up having to put some sort of backing plate under there. When you're driving with antennas deployed, make sure you observe the height clearances. In California, most highways have a 13.5-foot minimum clearance, sometimes up to 14 feet, depending on the route you're taking. But that doesn't always mean you have a free and clear 14 feet. You have the aforementioned trees. You have some bridges that have a curved profile. And if you're driving near the right side of it, you don't have the same 14 feet that you do when you're driving in the middle. So watch all those clearances, both natural and man-made. Certainly parking structures. I have plenty of friends who have to forego ever parking in a parking structure because they have so many antennas on there. They'll probably take out all the fluorescent lights in the parking structure. I had a slightly different solution for mine. I have separate to 2-meter and 70-centimeter verticals. The 70-centimeter is near the front of the hood, and it's curved down, so it's short enough. It doesn't bother the garage. I can drive into the garage with it. The 2-meter whip in the back, I simply bent at about a 45-degree angle up a couple of inches so that the tip clears the garage. It still works fine, but I don't have to worry about parking structures, including my own. What about coax, getting the signal from the antenna to the radio or vice versa?
There's a couple of questions for us, Marty.
Okay, questions. Sure, let's stop.
Okay. Where do you get the clamps that swing closed on the mast mounts?
The clamps that what?
That swing closed on the mast mounts?
Oh, on the one that I had?
Yeah.
I got them at a scrapyard. It happened to be somebody had scrapped a bunch of old scaffolding, like they put up for doing work on the sides of buildings. And so I grabbed a handful of them, cut off the part I didn't need, cleaned them up and took them to my local, we have a local guy who's a really excellent aluminum welder. He does, 10,000th of an inch tolerance stuff. And he did a beautiful, clean job on that. So that's where I got them. There may be other sources, but that to me works really well.
Okay. There's also any tips on maintaining logs?
On maintaining a log?
Yeah.
Normally you don't while driving. If you have to, like if it's in a contest and you're operating mobile, I would say have a voice recorder going, whether it's the record function on your phone or a little inexpensive digital recorder, and record the whole thing. Put in a time reference when you start and a time reference whenever you stop. And then you can go back and recreate the log in written or electronic form if you need it.
Okay. And one more, does Toyota sell the front ball hitch mount?
Not to my knowledge. The ball hitch mounts you'll find from everything from some of the major antenna manufacturers have it. There's a company called Breedlove that makes race car stuff. They make a really robust one. You'll find them at swap meets and so on. But again, they're not all made the same. And we'll talk about that at the end.
Okay.
Anything else?
And that's all, just a couple of comments that people can read later.
Okay. Okay. So picking your coax, how are we doing for time? Avoid foam dielectric stuff. It's lower loss, true, but for the same size coax. But foam can more easily distort in the heat. In a parked car, it can get pretty hot, right under the roof of a dark car, boy. And then any of those bends are subject to the center conductor migrating toward the shield, and at best giving you an impedance discontinuity, and at worst giving you a short. Solid dielectric is better. My favorite is Teflon coax, like RG142, RG400. It's about the same size as RG58, the things that most mobile mag mounts are supplied with from the factory, but it'll handle 5,000 watts. It's Teflon dielectric, which means the heat won't do anything to it. And it's got a TFE jacket, which is impervious to gas and oil and almost everything else. So, and the loss is a little bit higher than foam dielectric of the same size, but you're only talking, 10 or 15 feet. So even on 70 centimeters, it's not a big deal. So use some good coax, but at a minimum, solid dielectric RG58. And I said the loss doesn't make much difference. 10 feet of RG58, you're talking about less than a dB on 2 meters and only about 1.4 dB on 70 centimeters. Using the RG400, about half a dB and 1 dB. So assuming you're using your mobile rig to talk to other people in the area or to a repeater, typically you'll have enough signal margins, you don't have to worry about it. I mean, you're not doing moon bounce. Route those transmission lines, make so that they don't get pinched from doors or closing hatch lids. Make sure they don't rub against anything sharp, get abraded. I mentioned that pipe insulating foam trick for temporary things going in and out of the window. Make sure all your bends are gradual. Every piece of coax has a specified minimum bend radius. That means you don't bend it any sharper than this. And so, know what that radius is for the coax you're using and make sure you don't exceed that. Let's talk about RF safety.
Someone said you can use foam pool noodles for the
Pool noodles. Okay, yeah, they're bigger. That may still work fine. The one thing, they tend to be thick. If they're split at all, their tubes, they're fairly thick wall. If you're going to use that, I use the one up on the inside top edge of the door frame that will have a enough opening ability that it'll kind of clamp around it. And then the real thin stuff, it's typically it's made for like 1/4-inch pipe, so it's got a very small hole in it, and then it's maybe an inch and a quarter in diameter and it's split. That really fits nice and tightly on the glass of the window itself. Okay, RF exposure. We now have some new we have some FCC standards from which we used to have some categorical exemptions, easy for me to say, and we no longer do. The middle of the roof basically gives you the least interior exposure. If a trunk lid is going to be much higher, I know people like to do that because it keeps the antenna lower, but that may affect not only the effectiveness of the thing, but now a lot of your RF is going right in the back window and into the passenger compartment. There was some modeling done at the request of Ivan Schulman, who's I think it's W2CS. He was a longtime member of the ARRL RF Safety Committee, and he wrote an article that unfortunately got watered down quite a bit before it made QST, but I've got the original article. And he looked at a 2-meter transmitter from the center of the roof at various power levels. That's 10 watts. That's 30 watts. That's 75 watts. Okay. Do you really need a 75-watt mobile radio? Probably not. I mentioned we no longer have the categorical exemption from RF exposure assessments for mobile operations as of this May, although if you've done the RF exposure calculations, you have a 2-year grace period. So if you didn't conduct an RF exposure before, you probably have to do one now. And that's going to be a little tough, but first thing you do is test to see if you qualify for an exemption. And if the vehicle occupants or the public are any closer than half a wavelength to the antenna, you don't get to test for the exemption. Okay, that's the exemption from doing a full-blown study. That means on HF and 6 meters, it won't qualify because halfway of 6 meters is 10 feet, and you're going to have a hard time getting 10 feet from the antenna inside your own vehicle. If on 2 meters, if the antenna is closer than 39 inches, on 220, if it's closer than 25 inches, and on 70 centimeters, if it's closer than 11, actually, if it's closer than 15 inches, then you've got a big test to do. You're not going to be eligible to try that exemption. Now, if you can't use the exemption, then you have to look and do the calculations. And these are just rough calculations that I did using the formulas in the literature. On 2 meters and 220, they fall pretty much in the same category. If you're within a meter, your threshold is 3.8 watts to be safe without having to do a full-blown study. If you're within 2 meters, 15 watts. Well, gee, I want to run, my radio runs 45 watts. Okay, 3.5 meters. Are you going to be 3.5 meters from the thing? Maybe not. So again, this is just my rough calculations. The slides will be there, but I encourage you, do your own calculations. And now remember that these aren't absolute. That doesn't mean, hey, I'm 3 meters, I can't run more than 33 watts. No, because when you do the full-blown calculations, the exposure is based on duty cycle. FM is 100%, other modes are not. And it's based on time of exposure over a defined period, maybe a 6-minute period, 30-minute period, depending on whether it's controlled or uncontrolled. Again, I'm not an expert on those rules, but I read them enough to know that, if your power exceeds what this chart shows for the distance, it doesn't mean you're out of pocket. It means that you need to do more work. You need to add some other factors, such as, how much out of every 6 minutes are you transmitting, for example. And if it's 10% of the time or 5% of the time, you're going to have a lot more leeway and you'll end up showing it's fine, but you have to be able to show it. I told you I had some good references for you. If you go back to October 1989, you'll find Ivan Schulman's article on general RF safety for amateurs. I think this is probably one of the articles that ended up getting him kicked off the committee, because they were shooting the messenger, in my humble opinion. And he talked, among other things, about not so much mobile, but for example, people who have to operate stealth and they have indoor antennas, and they've got HF antennas running inside their attic right over their head, running kilowatts. This is the sort of thing he was concerned about. The other reference up top there, K0BG, Alan Applegate. He has the most comprehensive mobile radio site I've ever seen. He's got dozens and dozens of articles on, for example, he'll talk about certain manufacturers' masts. And he says, the problem with these masts is they're press fit in and they could easily pop out. So it's a risk that part of your antenna will go flying off and hit the car behind you in the windshield or something. He talks about how to eliminate tire static. He rates various ball mounts, just all sorts of things. It's a wealth of information, and I applaud him for keeping all that together. That's the sort of thing that I look at and try and figure out, how does that affect me? And it's one of those sources I go back to on a regular basis. So there's my buggy outfitted for 10 bands of roving. You may not see it too well, but in the front it has a mast with a 2-element Moxon for 6 meters. But there's 2 meters, 220, 432, 900, 1200, 2 gigs, 3 gigs, 5 and 10 gigs. All operate from inside. So, and this will go down the highway at 75 miles an hour in Nevada and Utah, no problem. So that's how crazy we get sometimes. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and now you can look at crazy me and we can answer any more questions. I'm going to put it on gallery view so I can see all your smiling faces.
Jessica, KM6,
or snoring faces, as the case may be.
Jessica, KM6 LFE, you want to come on and ask your question, please? Unmute. You need to, there we go.
Okay. My question was, okay, I mean, it's concerning everything, but the CB radio that they had a long time ago, I guess my parents had them, our relatives had them, and they had them in the car. You're talking about how you would put them in the car and the safety and everything. Is it the same as doing that with the CB radios as with these hand radios that we put in the car with the antennas?
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, you're talking about, physically, it's about the same size and weight as many of the radios we use today. So the same concerns about flying around in an accident are there. The power level is generally less than what we were using, so that's the kind of thing. They typically were limited in that day. They were limited to 5 watts, as I recall. So likely they were not going to draw enough current that you had to worry so much about powering them. You could use your cigarette lighter for that, because the draw would have been minimal. But then the obstruction of visibility is the same issue. So other than the power and of course the efficiency of the antenna, CB of course is 27 megahertz, which for a quarter wave spike on that would be about 108 inches, which will typically mounted on top of a vehicle that start running you into bridges and overpasses. but they had shorter ones with loading coils and everything that were less efficient. But that's as much of a parallel as I can draw.
Is that like the same radios as in a radio, like for police stations, like the police and fire stations
Yeah,
they have in there?
police and fire radios, if you ever, seen their vehicles up close, they typically have dedicated mounts that mount with steel structures to typically the floorboard of the vehicle, like the hump between the driver and passenger seat.
Okay.
And they have faceplates and brackets that are all, bent and welded, and they're very heavy duty. So they don't have to worry about the radios coming out or flying around. But they do have to
Okay,
be
so in
concerned
the
about
first thing,
power.
if I want to put one into my vehicle, first I have to get a vehicle because I don't have one yet. To start out very small with this, that's what I was thinking about the CB.
Yeah,
the
well,
CB radio,
I mean,
how it was constructed, but it
there
wouldn't
are
be the
some
same
there are
thing.
some pretty compact there's some pretty compact amateur transceivers around as well. So, some of them used as well as new. But talk to some of the folks on Aries. I can hook you up. I can hook you up with some of the people who've done that, particularly those who do motorcycle mobile, because they have to have it small and compact. So you'll get some good recommendations from them.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your, because I learned a lot too in your
Good.
presentation. Thank you.
All right. Other questions?
Dan, you want to handle the hands?
You got it. Yes, Tom, go ahead.
Couple of things. Have you heard of a PUP generator, Marty?
PUP as in Papa Uniform Papa?
Correct.
No, I haven't.
Okay, all it is a plate. You can buy them ready-made if you want from a place called the epicenter.com, but you can make them yourself. And it's a plate that will hold a small engine and also hold a truck alternator for a large truck, like a 450 or something on that size. And you put a belt on it, an industrial A belt, and the pulleys are available commercially, but they're also available from the Epicenter, which I have no connection with. And it gives you unlimited DC. You clip it onto your battery of your vehicle, turn the rest off, and it sips gasoline instead of guzzling it.
Okay, so it's not a power takeoff from the engine. It's basically its own little engine that runs a generator like under the hood or in the back of bed of a truck or something.
Well, most people put it on the ground. It's an old trick when the 14-hour rule for field day meant something. Now they give you the extra time at the end, which is useless. But when they used to give you the extra time up front, you could bring your best mobile operators to a stop, throw a couple of pups on the ground, put the adapter on their antenna on the roof, throw a couple of wires up in the tree, and use the 2 hours for full effect.
Yeah. And then at the last 2 hours of the contest, everybody tells them the contest is over.
Yeah, exactly. That's why the present rule is useless. And then the other thing is the adapter from NMO to type N, or if you insist on using UHF, NMO to type UHF, is a great thing to have because, again, instead of running things through doors and windows or any of that, you put it on the type N mount and you can have the car closed up as tight as you want, and the coax goes off your NMO mount on the roof.
Yeah,
So,
that's a great little tool. And I've got one that converts to type N. The NMO mounts, as we mentioned earlier, are kind of the industry standard, and they can be mounted with a hole in the roof from the top, and they're fairly flat, very low profile. And then the antennas that you put on them have kind of a spring finger that contacts that center conductor. But you thread one of these things on and you have, like in my case, a type N. Now, the reason I have that, I run too many cables out the vehicle to be able to use that. But by putting an NMO mount on an N adapter on there, I can now run my antenna analyzing setup. I can put on the test, the calibrating shorts and loads and so on, so that then I can calibrate out the coax when I'm measuring the performance of a mobile antenna. And so when I sit there inside the vehicle, put the antenna on, run this, and the system knows that the analyzer knows to how much coax there is, what the loss is, what its characteristics are about various frequencies, and it knows to calibrate that out. So I'm really looking at just the performance of the antenna as though my analyzer were right at the base of the roof.
I hope I copy that. I'm a retired electrician, so any wire that you buy that doesn't have a nylon jacket, and it'll say, for instance, NTSN or something like that, the first letter will be an N if it's got a nylon jacket. You should loom it, and that includes the welding cable, because the rest of them are insufficiently resistant to abrasion. So if you loom the conductors, you're going to give it a chance to survive the operation of your vehicle for a lot longer time.
Yeah, that split loom is really good stuff. And then, as I say, when I run it up through the floor of the vehicle, I have the holes I made have I put grommets in there, rubber grommets, and then I use dish soap to lube it and slide it up through there. And so there's no strain on the cable at all.
Yeah, and then the last thing is there are photoluminescent rolls of loom, okay, that you can buy from a variety of online vendors. And what that means is you can cut whatever length out of it you need, snap it onto your guy lines, and even after the sun goes down, the guy line glows in the dark, and it makes it really less likely. You know, you buy something truly ugly like orange or lime green, and then it glows in the dark, and it makes tripping over guy lines a lot less likely.
Hey, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. That's a great idea. Yeah, I know that you can buy a line with luminescent threads and so on, but that's cheap and easy way to do it, and it's wide enough that nobody's going to miss it. Very good, thank you.
All right, we got two Dennis's here. Let's take Dennis in California.
Anthony posted a link in the chat for a 12-volt puck generator, if anyone is interested.
Thank you, Barry.
Okay, Dennis in California.
All right, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Marty. And good evening to you. A couple of comments. One is you were talking about the exemptions, and you mentioned half wavelength, and I think it's actually wavelength over 2 pi. So you want to check that number. It's a lot less than what you think it is. And there's also an absolute exemption of 20, or a non-exemption of 20 centimeters. So if you're closer than 20 centimeters to the antenna, you have to, there's no possibility of an exemption. You have to do the analysis and do your absorption. The other thing is you mentioned batteries and generators. I don't know if you were a member of SBMS at the time, but we had somebody who was up in the Angeles National Forest, and they had an external battery, and like all of us run when we're doing 10 gigs and doing the 10 gig contest. You have a battery sitting on the ground, and the guy got ticketed for it. And the ranger was telling him that it needs to be in an enclosure. So you can't just have a battery sitting on the ground if you're in like national forest, or I would expect national park or any place like that.
Only in California.
Well, no, national forest is national forest.
National forest is national forest, and that Angeles National Forest is where this took place. You know, the Highway 2 lookout where we all go.
Yeah.
That's where
although I normally don't put a battery on the ground anyway. I mean, you have it inside the vehicle, kind of positioned in a way that it's not going to fly around. I wouldn't have it on the ground anyway. But that's good to know. Also, there are some rules in some national and state parks where you can't have anything outside the vehicle that would impede the use of the transit of the public or obscure their view.
Yeah.
So you clear that sort of thing with the local rangers and so on. Usually they're pretty cooperative. We have one or two that were jerks, but for the most part, we've had really, really good cooperation from them.
Well, what I've done with my batteries is I put them in an igloo cooler.
Oh, okay.
And I put a rig runner on the outside of the cooler and bust that into the battery inside the cooler, and then everything just plugs into that. And that was really a great setup.
Ah, very good.
I really like that setup that way.
Excellent.
So
it makes it.
Yeah, those were my comments. And thanks for the presentation, Marty. Nice job.
Thank you.
Good. Let's pick up Dennis in Oregon. Go ahead, Dennis. Dennis in Oregon.
just dropped out for some reason.
Muted.
I just lowered his hand.
We see you, Dennis. Go ahead. We're not hearing you though. Is your mic on?
Muted for some reason.
Okay, let's.
Maybe you can put it, if he can put it in chat and we can deal with it that way because we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm looking for it.
All right, let's go to Tom. Tom, you got your hand up here.
K7RFO,
Well, I don't know what that is, but
How are you doing, K7RFO?
Oh,
the,
we're listening to somebody's radio. I think Dennis's radio.
so anyway, if you have a generator on the ground in a national park or forest, the fine is much steeper. Unless you've got a spill retainer. It's sort of like a small tub that you might use for containing wash water.
Oh, right,
But
right.
it's made of coated canvas, and you set it up with pegs, and the fuel tank, if you have an overboard fuel tank, and the generator itself have to sit in an enclosure. And here's the important part: they will measure the enclosure against the amount of gasoline contained. And if the enclosure can't contain every pint of that gasoline, you fail and you pay the fine. And it's really steep.
That's
So-
interesting because we've had generators running on the ground without such enclosure at in the Angeles National Forest, or actually Los Padres National Forest, and the rangers have come by and everything is cool and they don't seem to have a problem with it. So, but it's good to know that that's a rule.
And they even make the firefighters do it during operations. I fought wildfires for 6 years.
Wow.
And even during fire operations, we had to contain the generators and the pumps in a spill enclosure.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And management gave us hell if we didn't do it because they didn't want the hell from the pollution control people within their own agency. So
Yeah, got it. Okay,
some,
good.
Some rangers are familiar with the rules, some are not, but you don't want to take the chance.
Good to know. Thank
And
you.
you must have a fire extinguisher present and make sure the discharge has a forestry acceptable muffler on it.
Right.
Doesn't matter what kind of muffler, as long as it's labeled forestry acceptable.
Forestry approved spark arrestor. And most of the modern generators like the Honda EU 2000s and so on, which are so popular, they do have spark arresters on them. And again, Forest Service seems to be happy with those. But if you're bringing up an old contractor style generator, good chance it doesn't have that. All right, good.
Okay,
Next.
Dennis, let's pick you up there. You're back. Dennis from Oregon.
Yeah, let's try this again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. Turn your video off and you'll have more bandwidth so we can hear the audio.
Okay. Now
Great.
you can hear me?
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Evidently had the wrong mic turned on. Yeah, there's been a nice presentation. I've enjoyed it. I got a question though on the article that you were referring to about Schulman, general RF safety. I went and tried to pull that up at QST and it does not come up.
Really?
Any suggestions?
I will take a look because I thought I had that article somewhere and I'd pulled it off the web. If I find it again, I will maybe include that as a second PDF if we can do that, Dan, as you know, just like sending the slides.
Sure, send it to me and I'll make sure that happens.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
No
Thanks for letting
problem.
me know that.
Okay, let's pick up Dale in Washington.
Marty, how do you copy? Over.
5-9, go.
Okay, I, like you, have a Forerunner, but I want to run up a 16, it's about a 20-foot window washing pole with VHF, UHF antennas on it for event parking, because we run these events in the deep woods out here on the Olympic Peninsula. And if I put it on the back, I can't raise the rear door of the car. So, I've looked at various ways of attaching it to the luggage carrier, but none of them are really sturdy.
For a pole that long, that's probably not what you want to do anyway. Two suggestions I have. One is go to your local hitch specialty place, have them put a hitch receiver on the front bumper. There's plenty of room for it, and it's nice and strong. I told them make it heavy enough to tow the vehicle, which is 5,000 pounds, and it's served me very well. And then you can arrange something that just slides into it, and you put a pin through it, and you're good. The other is that would be a good application for a drive-on base.
That I didn't want because the ground is not level. I frequently have to park in a ditch, and that would put my antenna off 45 degrees or into a tree. But I did do a quick search and found bolt-on front hitches for the 4Runner, towable. They'll tow the vehicle, no drilling, cutting, or anything. It'd be just a matter of finding one of those really good.
Okay, well that'd work. And as far as parking on non-level ground, one of the things you could do, and you'd probably just have this welded up yourself at a local shop, is have the fixture pin. You have a tilting mast, if you will, with your drive-on base, and have several holes so that you can adjust the angle to where it's vertical, and then pin it there.
Great. Yeah, I'm
Have
good.
it tilt front to back instead of from the side up. And then if you have to have it, 25 degrees this way, just have a couple of extra holes and you can get it pretty close.
Okay, thank you, sir. And good presentation. I made lots of notes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Larry, just pick you up real quick.
Yeah, as far as that hitch goes, I've always gotten a kick out of that because it kind of eliminates any back doors. But one fix that I helped a guy come across is we put a T-bar on it that ran out past his fenders. You slip the T-bar in. Not only did he have it like a basket that you could put it on, which he used as a table for his radios and stuff, but also the T-bars had the antenna out on the outside of the fender.
It mounts on either end?
Yeah. Well,
great.
It's a T-bar. The lower part of the T fits into the hitch, and then it's just, he had basically a 2-inch square, again, welded so it went horizontal with the bumper. And then he went one step further and mounted matter of fact, I helped him make the table and put it on there. So that's one of the options.
Okay, good. Yeah, you can get creative with that. Once you have a standard mount, and the same places that weld on the hitches for you have plenty of stock of 2x2 rounded corner steel, and they'll drill it for you so that the hole matches for your pin, and from there you can do whatever you want on it. You can put a rotor base plate. You could put a rotator base plate. You could put a dinner table. You could put a ladder, whatever.
Lots of good ideas, and leave it to amateur radio to be creative. Okay, Barry,
I prefer a keg.
Okay, that works too. Barry, you want to pick up the chat stuff?
We're all good in the chat.
Okay. Well, Marty, you did another good one.
Well, thank you. This has been fun, and thanks for the good comments and stuff. Got some good ideas out of it.
We all got some good ideas out of this.
And Anthony posted some interesting links in the chat for everybody, if you'll read it later.
Okay, I'll make sure all that gets in there.
Wonderful.
One last thing, if I may. When the military uses strap-on mounts and magnetic mounts, they all have tethers. And that's something you can do on your own. If you're using a magnetic mount, use a strong one, but tether it to the vehicle so that if it gets knocked off by a tree, it's not going after the vehicle, it's staying on board. You may hate what it does to your car roof, but at least you won't hit somebody in the windshield.
Very, very good idea. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. And Jessica, as soon as you get that car, we want to see that mobile mount. We want to see how you do it.
Okay, I will do that. And we'll have Marty help me out with that, or some of the other crew of the ARRL. We'll ask them.
He's a good source. He is a real good source.
He's an excellent source. He's still trying to get me to get on so everybody can hear me, because right now everybody can't hear me from the house or like doing the net or anything. They can hear me when I check in.
That's the evils of not having access to your roof.
That's true.
Because you don't own the roof.
But I'll try.
He'll work it out for you, believe me. Okay, is there any more comments or whatever here? I don't see
Alrighty.
anything, hear anything. We'll close it up for another, wait a minute, her voice. Is somebody wanting to say
I
something?
just want to say thank you for helping me get on, because if you hadn't told me about the little thing to pull up on my computer, my new computer, I never would have been able to see anybody.
Well,
I would have been
I'm
in the
glad.
dark
That's,
for the whole night, but thank you
well,
so
thanks
much.
for joining us. And thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. Again, appreciate your hanging around a little extra time.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll call it a good night. I appreciate everybody showing up, and we'll have another tomorrow, same time, same place. So see you tomorrow.
All right.
Everybody, thanks.
Thanks
for coming.
all.
You know,
Good night.
almost over 50 people.
But what is tomorrow? What is tomorrow?
We have presentations
another
every Thursday. and
Oh,
they're-
every Thursday?
as well as Wednesdays.
It's the Great American
okay.
Shakeout.
Oh, it's the shakeout
Yeah.
too. Yes. Everybody duck, cover, and hold.
I'll be checking in for that at 10:21 tomorrow.
Oh, I should say
Right.
duck, cover, and hold, and then get on your radio.
After
All
you
right.
determine that you're
Good night,
safe.
everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good night.
Dan. Have a nice
Okay,
7-3, everyone.
73.